Captain Underpants. The movie begins with a little boy narrating a humorous comic story to his friend. Together, they have created their very own comic book with lots of characters. It's their own world, where they create all sorts of characters and magical places. The two little boys are best buddies. The narrator is a boy named George Beard, whereas his best friend's name is Harold Hutchins. Together, they start to tell the story of one of their favorite comics. Once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, there was a planet named Underpantyworld, and in this world, the citizens only ever wore underpants. Tragically, the planet is about to mysteriously blow up. In order to protect their child, the planet's king and queen send him to Earth, where he is raised by a dolphin couple. That child quickly grows up to become the famous Captain Underpants, who happens to be George and Harold's superhero creation. George and Harold smile with glee as they finally read their comic's origin story. They love it and talk about how they have come so far. But just then, a rude-looking man snatches them up and tears apart their origin story. The man is Principal Krupp. He hates anyone who tries to have fun, and also despises all forms of entertainment. Due to this, Krupp is always looking for ways to ruin the boys' lives. He doesn't want George and Harold to make funny comics anymore. Later, Krupp takes the boys into his office. While he lacks evidence, he believes that the boys are responsible for a number of elaborate pranks carried out at his elementary school. These include gluing a teacher's butt to her chair, hanging all of the school's books from the ceiling, throwing slime at the teachers, and even bringing a tiger into class. This has caused a lot of nuisance in the school, and Krupp wants to put an end to all this mischief. As George and Harold walk to class, they explain that they make up pranks to cheer up the students, who are all extremely unhappy at the school. They arrive at their class and sit behind their nerdy rival student, named Melvin, who has absolutely no sense of humor. Just then, a loud sound is heard, and an announcement is transmitted over the loudspeaker. It's none other than Krupp, informing all students that they must spend their Saturday at the school's invention convention, which only Melvin seems to be excited about. Later that day, the boys go to George's treehouse, where they run their own comic book company, called Treehouse Comics Inc. That's when they mention how the two of them became friends in kindergarten. It all started when they both laughed at the teacher while she was talking about the planet Uranus and called it a gas giant. As a result, George and Harold became lifelong best friends, who spent every passing second together. On Saturday, the boys are ecstatic about what they will do for the day, until their mothers remind them that they must attend the invention convention. They are disappointed, but they continue. At the convention, all the students walk dejectedly towards the school auditorium. As expected, Melvin takes the stage to demonstrate a horde of his inventions, which bores everyone and even puts Mr. Krupp to sleep. Harold then takes this opportunity to persuade George to pull off their most elaborate prank yet. The two hide behind Melvin's turbo toilet invention and set it off, shooting toilet paper rolls across the room and flashing lights everywhere. The once boring room becomes alive with laughter and excitement. Thinking that they've made everyone happy, the boys walk out of school triumphantly until they are brought back to Mr. Krupp's office. There, Krupp summons Melvin to the office as well, in order to show the boys that he has finally obtained proof of their pranks. Melvin hands over his toy toad, which contains a hidden camera. Through the camera's footage, it is clear that George and Harold are tampering with the turbo toilet. Krupp is ecstatic to have physical proof, because now he can finally put the boys in separate classes, keeping them apart. Harold is terrified after hearing that Krupp will separate him and George. He imagines a world in which the two no longer see each other and awkwardly bump into each other at the mall, before being attacked by robots and a giant version of Melvin's toy toad. George agrees that the situation is very bad, and so they come up with a plan to stop Krupp. At school, the boys wait for the perfect opportunity to sneak into Mr. Krupp's office. There, they notice that he actually has a crush on Edith, the school lunch lady who made him a tuna casserole. In an attempt to flirt with Edith, Krupp follows her into the corridors, but his secretary enters before George and Harold can get a chance to sneak in. The two somehow manage to divert her attention by calling the office and putting her on hold in the hopes that she will win $1 billion. That's when the boys sneak past her and into Krupp's office, where they discover a drawer full of items confiscated from them over the years, including a cushion, their old comics, and a cereal box named Hypno Ring. Krupp finally returns and prepares to sign the papers that will legally separate George and Harold. Desperate, George leaps onto Mr. Krupp's desk and uses the Hypno Ring on him. Krupp laughs at him, thinking the ring won't work, but it actually does. The ring eventually puts him into a trance, and the room spins. Being the mischief makers that they are, George and Harold have fun with the ring by making Krupp act like a chicken and a monkey, but then they come up with the idea of making him their official Captain Underpants. Krupp rips off his clothes and pulls a curtain off to make a cape before exclaiming, "Tra-la-la." The boys laugh until Captain Underpants jumps out the window and runs into the street where he is hit by a car. Soon after, George and Harold pursue Captain Underpants as he enters the city. There, he sees a mime and believes that he is trapped in an invisible box, so he punches through it, striking the mime in the face. Captain Underpants then throws an elderly lady into a tree while she attempts to retrieve her cat. Thinking that he's there to save the world, Captain Underpants goes on to climb a tall building to confront what he assumes is a giant monster, but it's actually a large inflatable gorilla. The boys rush to prevent him from injuring himself. They quickly deflate the balloon, and Captain Underpants lands on two fleeing bank robbers, transforming him into a true hero who has apprehended the bad guys. Before the cops arrive, George and Harold take him away. Meanwhile, a short little man notices a job posting for an elementary school teacher. He then begins to laugh menacingly. The boys finally bring back Captain Underpants to the treehouse. When he gets wet, he reverts back to Mr. Krupp. Right then, the boys also figure out that Krupp will continue to be Captain Underpants as long as they keep snapping their fingers. However, in order to maintain appearances, he must pretend to be mean old Mr. Krupp while at school. Back at school, the boys rip up their legal separation papers and have Captain Underpants play the mean Krupp. Just then, they come across Edith, who inquires about the tuna casserole. Unfortunately, Captain Underpants confesses that he hasn't had her casserole. Edith is disappointed, but gets ecstatic as soon as Captain Underpants compliments her blue eyes and charms her. The boys eventually take him to his office, where they discover the little man that was looking at the job posting. The man says that he has applied for the job as a science teacher. He introduces himself as Professor P and begins his interview with Captain Underpants. During the interview, George and Harold notice Professor P drawing several weapons. They're really weirded out by him and go over his resume, which clearly outlines his plans for vengeance. But Captain Underpants hires him right away. The two boys leave with the new professor while Captain Underpants starts fiddling around in the office. Suddenly, he shoots himself with a water spray and becomes Mr. Krupp once again. Professor P soon begins teaching science classes. He speaks to the children about the parts of a child's brain that respond to anything humorous. That's when he confesses that he hates laughter and wishes to be free of it entirely, which Melvin completely understands as he finds nothing amusing. As Professor P is teaching, Harold makes a joke, causing everyone to laugh out loud. This enrages Professor P, and so he sends George and Harold back to Krupp's office for punishment. The boys are shocked to find out that Krupp is back to being mean. They quickly snap their fingers, and he's back as Captain Underpants. The boys then employ him to obtain Professor P's file from the secretary, and that's when they discover that his real name is Professor Poopypants. Back in the corridors, Poopypants walks into the cafeteria and notices all the children laughing. He even puts some of them in a cage to try to stop the laughter, but he can't seem to stop everyone. That's when he finds out that all the students are reading Captain Underpants and the Perilous Plot of Professor Poopypants, which happens to be the latest comic by George and Harold. Poopypants begins to hyperventilate as this event triggers many negative memories. He remembers winning a prize for inventing a gun that shrinks and grows things. However, when his name was mentioned, everyone started laughing and refused to take him seriously, which sparked his desire for vengeance. Out of anger, Poopypants takes George and Harold to see Mr. Krupp, but he's still Captain Underpants. He starts to complain about the boys, but Captain Underpants gets really impressed by the comic. While reading it unwillingly, Poopypants notices a character named Anti-Humor Boy in the comic, who is supposed to be Melvin. Later, the boys bring home an unconscious Mr. Krupp. That's when they decide to look around for entertainment, only to discover that Mr. Krupp is extremely lonely. On the other hand, Poopypants tracks down Melvin and employs him in his evil scheme. He scans Melvin's brain and discovers that he lacks the part of the brain that responds to humor. Soon, this new discovery of his becomes critical to his revenge plan. Meanwhile, Captain Underpants organizes a carnival for the entire school. Soon, things start to get chaotic as he continues to accidentally get wet, and the boys are forced to snap their fingers. Captain Underpants begins feeding sugar to the kids, and George and Harold want in on the action. This proves to be a bad idea as they get a sugar rush, leaving Captain Underpants to his own devices. As he's on his own, Captain Underpants tries to drive a bus through fire rings over a ramp, but thankfully he gets wet and the bus slows down. He then rides the bus backwards into a Ferris wheel, which comes loose and rolls toward the school. It begins to rain, so Captain Underpants snaps back to being Mr. Krupp. Mr. Krupp can now cause trouble for the boys as he can't be snapped back to Captain Underpants. He then successfully separates George and Harold into different classes. Upset, the boys walk away from each other, having no idea what they should do. It's like laughter has been snatched away from them. On the other hand, Poopypants and Melvin finish their invention, which is a massive version of Melvin's own invention, the Turbo Toilet 2000. But when they try to start it, they discover that there is no fuel. An idea strikes Melvin's mind, and he takes Poopypants to the school cafeteria, where they obtain a supply of toxic leftover food to use as fuel. Outside the school, the turbo toilet begins to stomp around. Both George and Harold notice it during their classes and request an immediate excuse. They reunite in the bathroom, but the villains use Melvin's brain to power a beam that strikes all the kids and turns them into humorless zombies. In order to avoid this, the boys run off to find Captain Underpants. Luckily, their snap works this time, and Krupp reverts to Captain Underpants. He soon joins the fight, but the turbo toilet easily defeats him. Before grabbing George and Harold, Poopypants drops Captain Underpants into the toilet's mouth. He then directs the laser beam at them in an attempt to stop their laughter, but it fails because the humor part of their brains is far too large. Even though the laser didn't affect them fully, the humor starts to drain from them as well. Soon, they get transformed into humorless zombies, just like the others. But just then, Poopypants says Uranus, which becomes a trigger word, and returns the boys to their normal state. As a result, the turbo toilet begins to malfunction. Melvin gets scared and leaves right away while the toilet falls apart. The students also come back to their original states. Still, Poopypants refuses to accept defeat and pulls out his shrink, grow gun. He attempts to hit the boys with it, but instead hits the school and a bird. On the other hand, Captain Underpants consumes the leftovers in the toilet, giving him his true superpowers. He leaps from the toilet and attacks Poopypants. The boys quickly snatch the gun from him and shrink him while restoring normalcy. George brings all the things back to their normal size after the gun goes haywire. Meanwhile, Poopypants takes this opportunity to escape on a bee as he's really tiny now. With the world now being almost normal, the boys go back to their treehouse with Captain Underpants. George and Harold accept that they may have to deal with being in separate classes because they know they can't keep him like this forever. George sadly destroys the hypno ring, and Krupp comes back to his real self. He sees himself naked and flees. They devise their latest prank. Later on, Mr. Krupp discovers a note in his school mail. George and Harold had previously made a card pretending to be Edith and sent it to Mr. Krupp, asking for a date. Mr. Krupp is happier than usual, and the two boys get really excited. He then hands back the Captain Underpants comics to the boys, admitting that he read them and found them amusing. Mr. Krupp and Edith eventually go on their date. When George and Harold see the couple getting really romantic, they agree not to do anything so nice again. Everything is filled with glee, and the boys become triumphant. Their happiness doesn't last much longer as the turbo toilet, which is located next to a restaurant, starts spilling toxic leftovers onto a slew of dumped toilets, mutating them into monsters. One of such toilets attacks the restaurant, prompting Krupp to request the bill. He snaps his fingers, transforming himself back into Captain Underpants. He flies out of the restaurant and fights all the toilets, surprising the boys. He then flies into the sky, while George and Harold clutch his cape in excitement. Toward the end, it is revealed that Mr. Krupp's secretary is still on hold for the $1 billion. When George and Harold pass by her, they return to the phone and startle her. She then hangs up, furious.